When James Anderson pulled up to the pristine colonial house on Magnolia Lane, carrying 3 bags of organic groceries that cost more than he made in a day, he had no idea that the lonely housewife behind the door was about to invite him into more than just her kitchen, and that one look between them would ignite something neither could ignore. The doorbell echoed through what sounded like too much empty space. James shifted the bags in his arms, checking his watch. 4th delivery of the day, 12 more to go. The usual routine: ring, hand over groceries, collect tip if he was lucky, move on. Keep it professional, keep it moving. The door opened and time stuttered. She was maybe 30, blonde hair pulled back in a way that suggested she'd given up trying hours ago, yoga pants and an oversized sweater that couldn't hide the curves beneath, or the fact that she was beautiful in that careful, expensive way that made James immediately aware of his uniform shirt and the way her gaze lingered on his forearms. But it was her eyes that caught him off guard, grey-green and hungry, like she'd been starving for something she couldn't name. "Mrs. Harrison?" he asked, though he already knew from the address. "Amy," she corrected quickly, her voice softer than necessary. She looked past him to his delivery truck, then back at his face, her eyes tracing the line of his jaw. "You're different from the usual guy." James felt the familiar weight of that observation, but this time it carried something else. Heat. "Tony's out sick. I'm covering his route." She nodded but didn't move to take the bags. Instead, she stood, there in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame, the other absently touching her throat. Up close, he could see the way her breath had quickened, the faint flush creeping up her neck. "These are heavy," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "Oh," she bit her lower lip. "Right, sorry." She stepped back, and as she did, her fingers brushed against his wrist. The contact was brief, electric. "Just set them on the kitchen counter." James hesitated. Protocol said groceries go to the doorstep, not inside. But the way she was looking at him, like he was water and she'd been walking through desert, made him step across the threshold. The house was magazine perfect and completely silent. No television, no music, no signs of life beyond the woman, trailing behind him, close enough that he could feel the heat of her presence. The kitchen opened into a dining room where a single placemat sat at a table built for 8. He set the bags down carefully, hyper-aware of how she watched his every movement, the way her breathing had changed. When he turned, she was closer than before, close enough that he caught the faint scent of vanilla and something dangerous. "Thank you," she whispered, and then, "Would you like to stay for dinner?" The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. James looked at her. Really. Looked and saw something that made his chest tighten, loneliness so deep it had weight. "I should probably get back," he said, but his feet didn't move. Amy's face shifted, the mask of politeness slipping just enough to show the disappointment underneath. "Of course. I'm sorry. I don't know why but I haven't eaten since breakfast," he added quickly, surprising them both. Her smile was small but real. "I was just about to start cooking anyway. I always make too much." 20 minutes later, James sat at her dining table, feeling like he was occupying space meant for someone else. Amy moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, pulling ingredients from the bags he'd delivered. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of chopping and sizzling. "So," she said, not looking up from the stove, "how long have you been doing deliveries?" 3 years. Started part-time in college, never left." He watched her hands as she worked, graceful and sure. "What about you? What do you do?" She paused, spatula halfway to the pan. "I'm between things right now." The way she said it told him everything and nothing. James nodded, recognizing the careful language of someone protecting a wound. "Smells incredible," he said instead. "My grandmother's recipe. She always said food tastes better when you're cooking for someone else." Amy set a plate in front of him. Herb crusted. Chicken, roasted vegetables that looked like art. She sat across from him with her own plate, and for a moment they just ate in comfortable quiet. "This is amazing," James said, and meant it. "Thank you." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I used to cook all the time. Recently, not so much." "Why?" She met his eyes, and he saw her weighing how much truth to offer a stranger. "Hard. To cook for one person feels pointless." James set down his fork. "Doesn't feel pointless to me." Something shifted in her expression, a wall coming down brick by brick. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. When you knocked on the door today, what did you see?" He considered lying, giving her something safe and forgettable. Instead, he said, "Someone who looked like she'd been waiting for a reason to smile." Amy's breath caught. "And now?" "Now I think I was right." The space between them felt charged, electric with possibility and danger. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the dining room gold, and neither of them seemed eager to acknowledge that his shift wasn't over, that he had other deliveries waiting. They moved to the living room after dinner, Amy carrying 2 glasses of wine like an offering. The space was all cream and beige, perfectly coordinated and completely sterile. James settled onto the couch, hyper-aware of how out of place he looked against the expensive fabric. "This is beautiful," he said, gesturing. Around the room, Amy curled into the opposite corner, wineglass cradled in both hands. "It's not mine. I mean, it is, but my ex-husband chose everything. I just lived in it." Ex-husband. The words explained the careful loneliness, the single placemat, the way she'd looked at him like he was an unexpected gift. "How long?" he asked, gently. 6 months since the divorce finalized, a year since he moved out. She took a sip of wine. "He said I was too quiet, too content with small things." James studied her face, the way she held herself, like she was still apologizing for taking up space. "Sounds like his problem, not yours." "Maybe." She looked at him over her glass. "What about you? Anyone waiting at home?" "Just my neighbor's cat. She brings me leftovers. I feed him when she's out of town." He smiled. "Not exactly the domestic dream." "Why not? You seem—" She paused, searching for words. "You seem like someone who'd be good at the domestic dream. Hard to build something with someone when they're embarrassed to introduce you to their friends." The words came out harder than he'd intended, carrying weight from relationships that had withered under the pressure of other people's opinions. Amy's expression shifted. "Understanding dawning, because of your job, because of a lot of things." He met her eyes. "People make assumptions about who I am, where I belong, what I deserve." Amy set down her wineglass, leaning forward slightly. "What assumptions do you think I made?" The question was dangerous territory, but her voice held genuine curiosity, not defensiveness. "When you opened the door, you looked surprised, like you expected someone different." "I did expect someone different," she admitted. "Tony's about 60, grey beard, talks about his grandkids. You're—" She gestured vaguely at him. "Young, black, handsome," she said quietly. "Intelligent. Present in a way that makes me remember what it feels like to be seen." The honesty in her voice hit him like a physical thing. James felt the careful walls he'd built around moments like this beginning to crack. "Amy, I know this is crazy," she continued, words rushing now like water through a dam. "You deliver groceries. I'm a divorced woman drinking wine alone on a Tuesday. But when you looked at me earlier, I felt something I forgot existed." The silence that followed was heavy with possibility and risk. Outside, streetlights flickered on, marking time they both wanted to ignore. The evening air was cooler now, carrying the scent of jasmine from Amy's neighbor's garden. James stood on her front porch, keys in hand, knowing he should leave, but unable to make his feet move toward the truck. Amy lingered in the doorway, one shoulder against the frame, arms crossed like she was holding something precious inside. The porch light cast shadows across her face, making her eyes look deeper, more mysterious than they had in the bright kitchen. "Thank you," she said softly. "For dinner, for staying." "Thank you for asking." He turned the keys over in his palm, the metal warm from his grip. "I should probably get going. Still have a few deliveries left." She nodded, but neither of them moved. The space between them felt electric, charged with everything they hadn't said. This was... Amy started, then stopped, shaking her head. "I don't even know what this was." "Different," James said. "Good, different." A car drove past, its headlights sweeping across them, and Amy instinctively stepped back into the shadows. The movement was small, but James felt it like a door closing. "Amy!" She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw the same conflict he felt: a want, warring with wisdom, possibility wrestling with practicality. "I know this is complicated," he said carefully. "I know there are reasons why—" "Don't." Her voice was gentle, but firm. "Don't make it about reasons. Not tonight." James studied her face, memorizing the way the light caught her cheekbone, the slight curve of her mouth. "Will I see you again?" The question hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross. Amy's fingers found the edge of her sweater, twisting the fabric. "I order groceries every Tuesday," she said finally, not quite meeting his eyes. "Tony should be back by then." "Maybe he'll call in sick again." James smiled, despite himself. "Maybe." He stepped closer, close enough to catch that vanilla scent again, close enough to see the rapid pulse at her throat. For a moment he thought he might kiss her, thought she might let him, but instead he reached out and gently touched her hand. "Good night, Amy. Good night." He walked to his truck, hyper-aware of her watching from the doorway. When he reached the driver's door, he turned back. She was still there, silhouetted against the warm light of her house. "Amy? Yeah? Order something you actually need next time." Her laugh followed him as he drove away, soft and real and full of promise. Wednesday morning found James staring at his coffee, mind replaying the sound of Amy's laugh. He'd been carrying groceries for 3 years, had a routine down to the minute, but suddenly every delivery felt like it was missing something. "You're distracted, Marcus," his route partner said as they loaded the truck. "Keep checking your phone like you're expecting something." James shrugged, lifting a crate of produce. "Just tired." But tired wasn't the word for it. Restless, maybe. Like he'd tasted something he couldn't stop thinking about. At 2:47 p.m., he drove past Magnolia Lane on his way to another neighborhood. He didn't slow down, didn't look at Amy's house, but his chest tightened anyway. She'd said Tuesdays, 5 more days. Across town, Amy stood in her kitchen staring at a grocery list she'd rewritten 4 times. The refrigerator was still full from Tuesday's delivery, but she found herself thinking of things she needed. Milk, even though she had a full carton. Bread, though she rarely ate it. Reasons to place another order. She caught herself checking the delivery app, seeing if there was an option to request a specific driver. There wasn't, of course. The universe didn't work that way. Thursday, James found himself taking the long route home, driving past neighborhoods he didn't usually see. Not looking for anything specific, he told himself. Just exploring. Amy went. Grocery shopping in person for the first time in months, walking aisles she'd normally scroll through online. She bought ingredients for recipes she'd never make, telling herself she was being spontaneous. At checkout, the teenager scanning her items asked if she found everything okay. "Actually," she said, then stopped. What was she going to say? Did. "You happen to see a tall delivery driver with kind eyes and calloused hands?" "Never mind, yes, thank you." Friday evening, James sat in his apartment playing video games he couldn't concentrate on. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, knocked around 8 with a container of leftovers and her cat in tow. "You seem different this week," she said, settling into his chair while the cat explored. "Lighter, somehow." James looked up from his controller. "Different? How, like someone reminded you that you're worth smiling about?" Saturday morning, Amy found herself at the farmer's market, something she hadn't done since before the divorce. She bought flowers she didn't need and strawberries that would probably go bad. But being around people, around life, felt necessary, in a way she couldn't explain. By Sunday night, both of them were counting hours until Tuesday. James double-checked the delivery schedule, hoping Tony would call in sick again. Amy crafted and deleted a dozen texts to the grocery store's customer service line. Neither of them slept particularly well, both wondering if the other was thinking. About vanilla scent and unexpected laughter, about the way some moments change everything. Tuesday came with the weight of expectation. James had volunteered to cover Tony's route again. Tony, who was miraculously suffering from another convenient bout of stomach flu. James didn't ask questions. Amy's order was larger this week, much larger. Enough groceries for a family of 4, though James knew she lived alone. He rang the doorbell at 3:15 p.m., exactly 1 week after their first meeting, his pulse doing things that had nothing to do with the heavy bags in his arms. The door opened faster than last time, like she'd been waiting by the window. "Oh," Amy said, her surprise perfectly performed. "It's you again." "Tony's still sick," James replied, playing his part in their careful theatre. "Looks like you're stocking up." She was wearing a sundress today, yellow like summer, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders. She looked like she'd spent time getting ready, then tried to make it look effortless. "I've been meaning to cook more," she said, stepping aside to let him in, "trying new recipes." James carried the bags to the kitchen, hyper-aware of how she followed, close enough that he caught glimpses of her in his peripheral vision. The house smelled different today, like lemon and something baking. "Smells incredible in here," he said, setting the bags on the counter. "Banana bread, my grandmother's recipe." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as nervous. "I made too much, obviously. I always do that." They stood in the kitchen, the pretense of the delivery complete, but neither moving toward goodbye. James found himself cataloguing details. The way afternoon light caught in her hair, the small scar on her wrist, the fact that she was barefoot again. "Would you like some?" she asked. "The bread, I mean, and maybe coffee?" James checked his watch. Though he already knew his schedule, "I probably shouldn't." "Of course, you're working." "I'm sorry, I didn't think, but I haven't had lunch yet," he said, the words coming out in a rush, "and I've got a break coming up." Her smile was like sunrise, slow and warming everything it touched. "Well, you can't work on an empty stomach." 20 minutes later, they sat at her kitchen table, sharing warm banana bread and coffee that was better than anything he'd ever tasted. The conversation came easier this time, less careful, more real. "Can I ask you something?" Amy said, breaking a piece of bread between her fingers. "Sure. Do you think about last week?" James met her eyes. Every day. The admission hung between them, honest and dangerous and impossible to take back. "Good," she whispered. "I was starting to think I imagined it." "There's a park about 10 minutes. From here," Amy said as they finished the banana bread. "I walk there sometimes, when the house feels too quiet." James looked at her, understanding the invitation beneath the words. "You want to go for a walk? Only if you want to. I know you're still working." "I'd like that," he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. They drove separately, James following her silver Honda through tree-lined streets to Riverside Park. It was the kind of place where young mothers pushed strollers and elderly couples fed ducks, wholesome and public and completely outside the private bubble they'd been building. Amy waited for him by the entrance, sunglasses on now, hands shoved deep in her pockets. "I come here when I need to remember that the world is bigger than my living room." They walked the main path at first, maintaining careful distance between them. James was hyper-aware of the other people around. A jogger with earbuds, two women chatting on a bench, kids on the playground. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the electric tension crackling between the man in the delivery uniform and the woman who kept stealing glances at him. "This feels different," Amy said softly. "Being out here with you." "Good different. Or bad different?" She considered this, stepping around a puddle from yesterday's rain. "Scary different. Real different." They reached a quieter section of the path, trees providing cover from curious eyes. Amy slowed, then stopped altogether, turning to face him. "James, I need to tell you something." His stomach dropped. Here it comes, he thought. The reality check, the explanation of why this was all a mistake. "I haven't felt like myself in a long time," she continued. "Years, maybe. But when I'm with you, I remember who I used to be, before I became someone's wife, someone's disappointment." "Amy, I know this is complicated. I know people would have opinions about us, about what this looks like." She gestured between them. "But I don't want to care about that anymore." A family walked past, parents trailing behind a toddler on a tricycle. Amy stepped closer to James, close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying I want to see where this goes." "If you do." James looked down at her, this woman who was risking more than he'd initially understood. In the sunlight he could see the exact moment she stopped being careful and chose to be. "Brave instead, I do," he said. "But Amy, once we do this, once we step outside your house together, there's no pretending it's just about grocery deliveries." She smiled, reached out, and took his hand. "Good," she said. "I'm tired of pretending." The whispers started on Thursday. James was loading his truck when Marcus sidled up, voice low and careful. "Heard you've been spending extra time on Magnolia Lane." "Who told you that?" James kept his voice neutral, but his shoulders tensed. "Driver on the afternoon shift saw your truck there last Tuesday. Said you were inside for over an hour." Marcus's tone wasn't accusatory exactly, but it carried warning. "Just saying, man. Rich neighborhoods have cameras. People talk." James slammed the truck door harder than necessary. "I'm doing my job. I know you are. Just be careful." That same afternoon, Amy discovered that small neighborhoods had long memories and sharp eyes. She was checking her mail when her neighbor Helen approached with her tiny dog and oversized opinions. "I saw you had a delivery the other day," Helen said, voice dripping with false sweetness. "Seemed like quite a lengthy one." Amy's grip tightened on the mail. "Just groceries, Helen." "Of course, dear. Though I have to say I was surprised to see you walking in Riverside Park with, well, was that the same young man?" The question hit like ice water. Amy felt the familiar urge to apologize, to explain, to make herself smaller. Instead, she straightened her spine. "Is there something you wanted to say, Helen?" "Oh, nothing at all. I just think it's wonderful that you're socializing again, though perhaps you might want to be more careful about appearances. This is a respectable neighborhood." Friday brought the reckoning James had been dreading. His supervisor, Derek, called him into the back office, face grim. "I got a complaint," Derek said without preamble. "Customer says one of our drivers has been inappropriate with female clients." James felt the ground shift beneath him. "Inappropriate how? Staying too long, making personal visits. Sound familiar? I delivered groceries. We talked." "That's it." Derek studied him for a long moment. "Look, James, I like you. You're reliable. Customers generally love you. But this job requires trust. If people think our drivers are crossing lines..." "What line did I cross?" "The one where you start caring more about one customer than all the others." James left work that evening feeling like he was wearing a scarlet letter only he could see. His phone buzzed with a text from Amy. "Can you come over? Something happened. He found her pacing her living room, anger radiating from every step. Helen called the grocery store, she said without preamble. Complained that their driver was being overly familiar with residents. James sank onto her couch, the pieces clicking into place. Derek talked to me today. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have known. Amy, stop. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Don't you see? This is exactly what I was afraid of. We can't even exist in the same space without people making it into something dirty. The distance between them felt like an ocean. James stared at his phone for the third time in an hour, Amy's contact information glowing on the screen. His thumb hovered over her name, but he couldn't bring himself to press it. What would he say? That he was sorry she was getting judged for knowing him, that he was sorry for existing in her world. His apartment felt smaller tonight, the walls pressing in with familiar weight. This was what he'd expected all along, wasn't it? The real world had a way of reminding people like him where they belonged. Mrs. Chen knocked around 8, carrying her usual offering of leftovers and concerned looks. You're different again, she observed, settling into his chair while her cat explored. Sadder. Just tired. She studied him with the sharp eyes of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize heartbreak. Sometimes the things worth having are the hardest to keep. James looked up from his untouched dinner. What if keeping them hurts other people? And what if letting them go hurts you both more? Across town, Amy sat in her art room, the one space in the house that had never been touched by her ex-husband's opinions. She'd been staring at a blank canvas for 2 hours, paintbrush heavy in her hand. The silence in the house felt different now. Before James, it had been lonely but familiar. Now it felt like something had been ripped away, leaving jagged edges where warmth used to live. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. Heard you were making waves in the neighborhood. Mom wants to know if you're having some kind of breakdown. Amy deleted the message without responding. She thought about James in his apartment, probably questioning everything they'd built, wondering if she was worth the trouble. The truth was, she'd been asking herself the same question. Maybe Helen was right. Maybe this was just Amy's way of acting out, of rebelling against a life that had suffocated her. Maybe she was being selfish, in pulling James into her mess, but then she remembered the way he'd looked at her when she took his hand in the park, like she was brave instead of broken, like she was worth choosing. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was James. Are you okay? She stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. 3 words that could mean everything or nothing. Finally, she typed back, I don't know. The response came quickly. Neither do I. Amy set the phone aside and picked up her paintbrush. On the canvas, she began painting a bridge, half-built, suspended over dark water, leading towards something she couldn't quite see. Outside, the neighborhood slept peacefully, unaware of the 2 people lying awake in separate beds, both wondering if some distances were too wide to cross. 3 days of silence felt like 3 years. Amy stood in her kitchen Friday morning, staring at her phone and the grocery delivery app she'd opened and closed a dozen times. James hadn't texted since their brief exchange Tuesday night. Neither had she. She could order groceries, hope he'd be the one to deliver them, pretend this was all still about food and convenience. Or she could do something that terrified her more than divorce papers or empty houses. She could choose him, publicly, deliberately. At 11:30 a.m., Amy walked into Fresh Mart Grocery, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd never been inside the store before, had always ordered online, kept herself separate from the place where James worked. The fluorescent lights felt harsh after days of hiding in her dim house. Can I help you find something? Asked a teenager with a name tag reading Madison. I'm looking for James Anderson. He works delivery. Madison's eyebrows rose slightly. He's loading trucks in the back. Is there a problem with an order? No problem. I just need to speak with him. Amy followed Madison through a maze of aisles to the loading dock, where several men in uniform shirts were moving boxes. She spotted James immediately, his back to her, shoulders tense as he loaded crates onto a dolly. James, Madison called. Someone here to see you. He turned, and Amy watched surprise, concern, and something else. Hope flash across his face. Amy. He set down the crate carefully. What are you doing here? She was aware of the other workers watching, curious about the well-dressed woman who'd come looking for their colleague. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice stayed steady. I came to ask if you'd like to have dinner with me tonight, somewhere public, like a date. The loading dock went quiet except for the hum of refrigeration units. James stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Amy, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She stepped closer, ignoring the audience. I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of letting other people's opinions make my choices for me. Marcus, who'd been pretending not to listen, grinned and muttered, Damn girl's got backbone. James looked at her, really looked, and Amy saw the exact moment he understood what she was offering. Not just dinner, but courage. Not just a date, but a declaration. What time? He asked softly. 7. Meet me at Riverside Cafe. Amy. And James? She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in days. This time, I'm not hiding. She walked out of that loading dock feeling like she'd finally remembered how to breathe. Riverside Cafe sat tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, the kind of place where college students studied and couples shared quiet conversations. Amy arrived first, choosing a corner table where they could talk without performing for strangers. James walked in at exactly 7, wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt that made her heart skip. He'd clearly gone home to change, to prepare, for this moment as carefully as she had. You came, she said as he sat down. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might decide I was more trouble than I'm worth. James reached across the small table and covered her hand with his. Amy, I need you to understand something. You're not trouble. You're the best thing that's happened to me in years. The waitress brought menus they barely glanced at, coffee they hardly touched. The conversation they'd been avoiding finally had room to breathe. I was married for 8 years. Amy said, fingers wrapped around her cup for warmth. 8 years of being told I was too quiet, too content, not ambitious enough. He wanted a wife who looked good at company parties and never embarrassed him. What did you want? To feel like myself in my own house. She met his eyes. I forgot what that felt like until you knocked on my door. James was quiet for a moment, processing. I've spent my whole life being underestimated. Teachers who assumed I wouldn't graduate, girlfriends who loved me in private but wouldn't bring me around. Their friends. I got used to being someone's secret. You're not my secret, James. Then what am I? Amy felt the weight of the question, the way it demanded honesty she'd been protecting them both from. You're the person who makes me remember that I deserve to be happy, that I deserve to be chosen. I choose you, he said without hesitation. But Amy, I need to know you're choosing me too, not just choosing to rebel against your old life. The accusation stung because part of it was true, but only part. At first, maybe it was rebellion, she admitted. But James, when you look at me, I see myself the way I want to be, strong, worth pursuing, real. Her voice broke slightly. I love you. The words hung between them, brave and terrifying. James's grip on her hand tightened. I love you too, which is why I need to know. Are you ready for what choosing me means? The stares, the comments, the people who'll never understand? Amy lifted their joined hands and kissed his knuckles gently. I'm ready to stop living my life for people who don't matter. And if it gets hard, then we get through it together. 6 months later, Amy's house felt different. Not because of new furniture or fresh paint, but because it held laughter now, conversations that lasted past midnight, the sound of two sets of footsteps moving through rooms that had been silent. Too long. James kept a drawer in her dresser, a toothbrush by her sink, work clothes hanging beside her sundresses. They hadn't officially moved in together, but somewhere between shared dinners and lazy Sunday mornings, the space had become theirs. "Helen's watching again," Amy said, glancing out the kitchen window as James made coffee. "Let her watch," he replied, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "She's got nothing better to do." The neighborhood had adjusted, mostly. Some neighbors still whispered, but others had surprised them. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down had asked James to help fix her garbage disposal. The Johnsons invited them both to their backyard barbecue. Change happened slowly, then all at once. James had been promoted to supervisor at Freshmart, managing a team of drivers who respected him, not despite his relationship with Amy, but because of how he handled the scrutiny with grace. Amy had started painting again, real paintings, bold strokes of color that she displayed in the local coffee shop where they'd had their first real date. "I have something to tell you," Amy said as they sat on her back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. James looked up from the delivery schedule he'd been reviewing. "Should I be worried? I put an offer on the house." "Your house?" "Our house." She smiled at his expression. "If you want it to be. The bank approved the buyout from the divorce settlement. It can finally be ours, not his." James set down his papers, studying her face. "Amy, are you sure? Once we do this, we stop pretending this is temporary," she finished. "James, I was pretending to be someone else for so long that I forgot who I really was. But you see me, all of me, and I want to build something real with you." He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "What about the people who'll never approve? They don't get a vote in our happiness." Later that evening, as they walked through Riverside Park hand in hand, Amy thought about the woman who'd answered the door that first Tuesday afternoon. Lonely, careful, living a life that belonged to someone else's vision. That woman felt like a stranger now. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked as they reached the bench where they'd first held hands. "Choosing this, choosing us." Amy looked at him. This man who'd delivered groceries and stayed for dinner, who'd shown her what love looked like when it was freely given, and shook her head. "Never," she said. "Best delivery I ever received."